about John McGahern. So all I'm really going to do is tell you my thoughts on when I read him, how I feel about how I read him, and how I came about starting to read him, because I came to John McGahern very, very late. I'm a photographer by trade, and I ended up photographing him on a couple of occasions in his home. And then I met him once by chance. He did a favour for me in Dublin, and it was when I was buying a present for my wife Maurice, and that they made Face the Rising Sun had just come out. And I knew, because of my work with the Sunday Independent, that John McGahern was giving press interviews in the Shelbourne Hotel on this particular Monday, and I was off on the Monday. So I thought to myself, well, I'll go and I'll buy the book that's just out, and I'll ask John to sign it for Maurice. And I'd never asked anybody to sign anything before in my life, but I thought, look, I was desperate for a present, and I knew Maurice loved John McGahern, so I thought I'd do this. I got the book, I went into the Shelbourne Hotel, and John's publicist, Michael McLaughlin, was there. And I asked him if I left the book, would he get it signed? I'd pick it up from him again. And he said, hold on a second, I'll go up to John. He's up in the room. And he went up, and then he came back down. He said, John said you're to go up to him. Well, I couldn't believe this. I walked in, and to be honest, I walked in the door and I started babbling. You know, I was really, really embarrassed. All I wanted to do was give the book to the publicist and get it back signed. I really didn't want to be imposing on him at all, but I went in and I started talking this rubbish, and I was telling him that it was just from my wife Maurice, and she was down from his part of the country. And he said, where is she from? And I said, he asked first what was her surname. I said, it's Maurice McDonough. And he says, where is she from? I said, Ballindoon. And he says, I know the McDonoughs in Ballindoon. And I was taken aback a bit at this, and I said, you might know her mother as well. Her mother's a Gray, and her family, they had a fruit business. He says, I knew the Grays. He said, the Gray brothers, he said, they were handsome men, big fuckers. Used to hate to see the Gray brothers come into a dance on a Sunday night into Drumshambo. They'd clean up. Now I was just flabbergasted with this, you know. And then he went on to tell me a lot more about the Gray brothers, you know. And all the while he was telling me this story, he was writing on this book, and he gave me the book, and I grabbed and I thanked him, and I was blushing, and I left, and I said, there's got to be some dedication on this, and I opened it up, and it says, if I can ever find it, it says, where is it? Don't tell me I brought the wrong well, anyway, it says, to Maurice, best wishes, John McGahern. That was all it said in the book. And we must have 2 copies of it. Oh no, here it is. For Maurice McDonough, with best wishes, John McGahern. But what amazed me was his openness, his knowledge of people, his recall, his willingness to share it. And then, like a really bad gift bearer, I gave this to Maurice, and I read it before she did. And when I was finished reading it, I felt that I'd lost a dear friend. I remember the night that I finished it, and I really thought that somebody had gone and died on me, you know. I just thought, God, can this really be over? So I was really, really taken by him, and I was fortunate then to meet him on another couple of occasions, go down and photograph him. But one of the things that struck me most about him was his ability that not many people have to mix with a variety of type of people. He was very at home in France, talking to professors in the universities of France, and yet he was very at home at the Martin Mohill, talking to the farmers there. And this was his brilliance, of course, because he could realise the value of what he was surrounded by, and he could bring that to a greater audience. And the little piece I'm going to read from here, and I'm not going to delay any longer, is, just to introduce this, one of the things that also struck me was an essay he wrote from the book that Maura read from there about farmers and how farming was changing and how Ireland was changing, how things were being lost. And sometimes I felt then after reading that he was trying to preserve these things in his writing. He was putting them in the books and writing about them so that these things would be preserved forever. And in this case, the piece I'm going to read from that they may face the rising sun. His beloved neighbour, his brother John, has died, and there's the man who should be laying John out can't be found anywhere. And Rutledge, who's the central, himself and his wife are the centre of this book, Rutledge offers to lay out John. And it's this piece, again, which is preserving something that I wasn't even, living in Dublin, ever familiar with. I'm going to read it. Sorry if I've been keeping you. The small car that had waited outside the gate beyond the alder tree returned with Jamesy. He was very agitated. The muted voices stopped as he went up to Rutledge. We sent out word far and wide and can find no trace of Patrick. Nobody appears to know where he's gone. Why is it so necessary to find Patrick? He always lays the body out. Jamesy looked anxiously around. The house was full, and though it was now well after midnight, people were still coming to the house. The cardboard boxes on the oval table were full of food and drink. By custom, nothing could be offered until the corpse was laid out and viewed. I lay Johnny out, Rutledge offered. Will you be able? Jamesy searched his face. The house went silent. I worked in hospitals when I was a student. Rutledge tried to hide his own anxiety. Do you think? Jamesy was uncertain. I'm sure, especially if I can get any help. I'll help, a man volunteered. Tom Kelly, a neighbour Rutledge knew slightly. He worked as a hairdresser in Dublin, was home visiting his mother, and had accompanied her to the house. You'll need a glass first, Jamesy said, and poured each man a glass of whisky and waited until they drank it down as if it was essential for the facing into the task. He added Rutledge a flat cardboard box. Jimmy Joe McGahern said everything is in there. Mary poured a basin of steaming water. She had towels, scissors, a sponge, a razor, a pair of white starch sheets, a pillow slip. She and Jamesy led the two men down into the closed lower room. Johnny lay on the bed in his shirt and trousers. His feet were bare. Poor Johnny, Mary said dreamily before leaving the room. Jamesy stood by her shoulder but did not speak. He was strained and taut. If there's anything you want, just knock hard on the door. Jamesy will come down, Mary said. Is there cotton wool? Rutledge asked. The flat box contained a large bag of cotton wool, a white habit, rosary beads, a bar of soap, a disposable razor. Jamesy closed the door firmly as he and Mary left the room. We'll have to get off the clothes. For a moment, as he held the still, warm flesh in his hand, he thought of themselves in the busy evening street a few hours ago, all the darts flying through from his now lifeless hand. It did not take an ambush to bring about such quick and irrecoverable change. By lifting the hips, the trousers were pulled free. There was a wallet, coins, a penknife, a comb, a bunch of keys, betting slips, rosary beads in a small, worn purse. With more difficulty, they drew the strong, thick arms out of the short sleeves, and pulled the shirt loose. The long cotton undershirt was more difficult still. The body was heavy and surprisingly loose. Cut it off. Wouldn't it be better to do it like the shirt? It's too tight. Rutledge handed Tom Kelly the pair of scissors, and when he looked doubtful at it, he won't need it anymore. There's no earthly edge on these scissors. You can never get a scissors or an edge in the country. They use them for everything, Tom Kelly complained. When at last he got the incision made, the cotton tore easily. They did likewise with the underpants. The only thing that remained on the body was a large silver digital watch, and the red numerals pulsing out the seconds like a mechanical heart, eerily alive in the stillness. You won't need that anymore either. The hairdresser removed the watch, but it continued to pulse in the glass ashtray until it distracted Rutledge and he turned it face down. He then noticed and removed his hearing aid. They closed the ears and the nostrils with cotton wool, and when they turned him over to close the rectum, dentures fell from his mouth. The rectum absorbed almost all the cotton wool. The act was as intimate and warm as the act of sex. The innate sacredness of each single life stood out more starkly in death than in the whole of its natural life. To see him naked was also to know what his character and clothes had disguised, the wonderful physical specimen he had been. That perfect coordination of hand and eye that had caused so many wildfowl to fall like stones from the air had been no accident. That hand too had now fallen.